Okay, I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to try to say two things about that story, or ask one question and say something else. The story I'm going to tell you is straight from the Torah. I'm going to try not to embellish on the story itself and sort of tell it like it is, but in my own words. At the end of Parshat Mattot, before we get to the very last parsha of the book of Numbers, there is a story that is easy to just pass by as if it's not there, or to think that it is insignificant. But in fact, almost everything that happens to the Israelites in the land after the Torah ends comes back in some ways to this story. And it is the story of when two tribes of Israel, just before entering the land, Reuben and Gad, ask Moses for a favor. They come to Moses and they say, look, we have a ton of livestock. We have a lot of property. And so it's pretty important that when you all are settling the land of Israel, the land as we have been told by God to settle it, we'd actually like to take an area outside of the borders of the land. We'd like to live in what would be called Transjordan, east of the Jordan, not west of the Jordan. And the reason we want to do that is because that's good land for the kind of livestock we have. It will be better for us. And they say to Moses, if we found favor in your eyes, let this land, west of the Jordan, east of the Jordan, be given to your servants for a possession. Don't have us cross the Jordan. It's kind of a remarkable moment. Once again, the entire project of the Torah is to get this people, with that Torah they received on Sinai, into the land to try out this new kind of civilization, different from all others in the ancient Near East. But it is dependent on the trifecta of people, Torah, and land. Two of the tribes at the last minute to ask for an out. Unbelievable. And Moses flips out. He flips out. This is what he says. Will your brothers go to war while you sit here? Why do you hold back the children of Israel from crossing over into the land that God has given them? That's what your fathers did when I sent them to scout the land. Remember that story? They came back and they said, no, 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 let's not go. Don't you remember how angry God was in that moment? You all have been wandering for 40 years because of that very moment. And now you're telling me you don't want to go into the land? You're going to bring the whole people down with you. That's how Moses reacts. To which Reuben and Gad come back, the heads of the tribes come back. They don't just come back, vayigshu, they draw close. Vayigshu, they draw close to Moses. Vayigash is a really important word in the Torah, to draw near. That's how Joseph and his brothers reunite. So they come back and they say, well, okay, all right, no. We'll fight with you. We'll fight with you. Like, taking the land is clearly a priority. We see ourselves as Israelite. We'll drop off our women and children first, set them up, and then we'll send over our very best troops, our shock troops, our chalutzim. That's how they're called in the Torah. To which Moses says, oh, okay, that's cool. I'm not kidding. Moses' response is, oh, all right, okay, you don't get that land until you help us settle this land. Once we settle this land, have at it. Go outside of the land. Now, all right, so here, this story, that's pretty much the whole story. They do, in fact, take the other side of the land. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. You have to sort of read through the rest of Tanakh to see how the Reuben and Gad and then half of the tribe of Manasseh, who's added onto it, fare outside of the borders of the land as delineated in at least one part of the Torah. So I want to ask one question about this. The first question I want to ask is, what does this teach us about Jewish peoplehood? Keep in mind, when we think of diaspora, we generally think about it as a condition of exile. We have done something wrong, therefore we have, this is by historically, I don't mean you and me in this room necessarily. Historically, we did something wrong, God punishes us, have to live outside the land. Before we settle the land, we have two tribes asking for a diaspora. Asking for it. Why? Are they trying to avoid their destiny, like the scouts? Do they see themselves as in it together with the rest of the Israelites? Or do maybe they just have two very different versions of the Israelite future? One that doesn't demand the land in the way God suggested. Or maybe Reuben and Gad were doing what most of us do, and I think we ought to be honest about it. We look out for our self-interest. First, what's better for me and mine? Maybe they didn't want to abandon the community as a priority or a value, but rather they wanted to strike a balance between what was best for them, what God asked for them, and the obligation to the larger community. But once that division happens, what does it mean to be part of the same people? Separate, but still together. Family, but apart. We'll fight together. We're in this together. We'll be attacked sometimes together, but then we go back to our respective homes, fending for ourselves. Can we live differently as a people with multiple altars? And they did build their own altar. Diverse practices, distinct obligations. I want to say I don't have a good answer to this question. The only answer I can give you is that Rabbi Yolkot has put together a program for the entire year of learning of Macomb, DC next year on Jewish peoplehood. Anthropologist Riv Evan Prell wrote this: the project of peoplehood requires first and foremost a commitment to pluralism, and secondly, a context in which Jews who define their Judaism or Jewishness differently from one another can find a common vocabulary and symbols to articulate a shared past in the service of the future. It was long. First and foremost, Jewish peoplehood is a recognition that we are different from one another, that there are communities within communities, but we must find somehow a shared past that we all align with so that we can have some kind of shared future, not knowing what it is. This is a critical question of today, especially with Israel and diaspora over the last 75 years, differently than most Jews could have ever imagined. But we have to confront the question of what it means to live on both sides of the Jordan, somehow in it together, but not entirely in it together, not living the same lives, but somehow having a shared fate and destiny. All of these questions are unanswered, and Reuben and Gad are the one who brought them to the Jewish consciousness before we ever got to the land. That is point number one. Check out the Macomb, DC website. It has been updated. It's stunning what Rabbi Yolkot has put together for next year. We begin in the middle of September with a Scholar in Residence weekend with Dr. Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute. It's going to be amazing. All right. Second, the other point of this story, the gigantic miscommunication between Reuben and God and Moses. So when I say God, this is the English word God means nothing in this context. God is the tribe. If I say Gad, I'll feel like an idiot. So I can't, it's God. All right. They come and ask for land east of the Jordan. And Moses immediately hears, you want out. You don't want to be a part of this project anymore. And he really yells and he screams. You can imagine, he's been told he can't even go into the land. He was just told he's going to die soon, in fact. And all of a sudden, you have two whole tribes saying, you know what, not for us. He loses it. But he was responding to what he thought he saw and heard, not to what was actually said or intended. And this is really important. This is really important because when Reuben and Gad come back, Vayikshu, they draw close to Moses. They come in and they say, no, let us tell you what we mean when we say we want this land. We don't want to abandon you. We do want to fight with you. We actually want to give you the very best of our fighters. We just want to also have a place for our lives to build, maybe separately from yours, but still part of the same nation. And Moses just didn't hear it. The miscommunication without drawing near is so indicative of the culture in which we live now, as well as what happened with Moses and the Israelites over and over again. It's almost hard not to notice it. What happens when we hear something that makes us uncomfortable and we respond with condemnation first? Relationships break down. What happens when we respond with curiosity first? Relationships are built up. We live in a culture of condemnation more than curiosity. And we ought to live in a world in which we begin with curiosity when confronted with something that makes us uncomfortable, and only then, if it reaches the level of condemnation, condemn, which we have to do. I've seen this so much recently. I mean, what happened with the Olympic boxing match between Italian boxer Angela Carini and her Algerian opponent, Imani Khalif, in which people, once they saw that Khalif won the gold, and Carini didn't shake her hand in that moment, saw an image that made them uncomfortable of a different combination of X and Y chromosomes that many are used to, immediately went after her as a trans person, which just tells you how low our culture can be sometimes, went after her, blasting it around the world, including some of our heroes, blasting it around the world, before later finding out that she was born as a female, has always identified as a female, and has fought in boxing for many years throughout her career as a female. But the people who oppose trans rights, the moment in which they saw the image of the losing boxer, it was a victory for them, and the smear campaign began. It was too late, because the image brought about that condemnation instinct and not the curiosity instinct to learn a little bit more about who a person may actually be. Another one we saw, and this one's harder for me to say, but it's real. For some of us, the moment we saw the bring them home swimmers from the Olympics, it was obvious as daylight that it was an AI image. But for many others, it was not. And the story around it was so compelling. Israel wasn't allowed to wear the yellow ribbons, and so they did this instead at the Olympics. It caught fire. But it wasn't real. Now, here's the thing. The message is as real as anything any of us ever wanted. We want to bring them home, and we want to bring them home now. So anything that looks like it's a slap into the face to those who won't want to make it happen feels like a victory. The question becomes, when we are confronted with images that just force us to ask an extra question about whether it's real, is do we begin with curiosity, or do we celebrate a victory of condemnation of what they didn't allow us to do? Look, do I think yellow ribbons should be forbidden at the Olympics as a political statement? No. It's not political. Those are our human lives. It's our family. And yet, it does us no good to use the internet in a way that perpetrates things that add to the overall culture of condemnation without curiosity first. How did Gad and Reuven explain to Moses? How did they explain to Moses that, in fact, he misunderstood them? Vayigshu. They drew near, like Joseph and his brothers drew near to one another before reconciling after all of those years. So I want us to maybe slow down a little bit, to confront our own instincts about others with curiosity first and not condemnation. I want us to draw near, which means sometimes bringing somebody else's story close, very close, uncomfortably close, but to also understand our own biases, our preconceived notions of what we think ought to be in the world that force us to see the world only as we understand it and not as it actually might be. There's a lot to learn from this story. We're going to spend a lot of time this year exploring it. This is just the beginning. Shabbat Shalom.